So I'm recording this on December 29th, 2024, and lately on social media there's been quite the discussion about H-1B visas, and I thought it might be a good time to share with you some thoughts about what is coming in terms of immigration. It's always a trade-off. I have a lot of things to talk about and only so much time, and juggling between writing books, making videos, etc. I have to try to get things out in the most logical order. And sometimes, like in the case of these things that I'm going to share with you, I've been sitting on them for quite some time. And I start to get the feeling that if I don't share them soon, most of what's in here will maybe be common knowledge. Whereas right now, it'll be maybe quite a surprise still. In this presentation, we're going to review something you've probably heard about. We're going to talk about things you haven't heard about. I'm going to share with you an incredibly important key for understanding and also generating prophecy. And I'm going to help you see some of the possibilities for what is to come and share some advice on how to prepare. Okay, so the thing you've probably heard about is this phrase, the remnant of Jacob. It's all over the scriptures. There are many references to it. You'll see a whole bunch in Isaiah, for example. Now, I'm not going to talk at end about this. You can find that in other places. But there is a lot to it. It's valid. It's important. Essentially, this is a phrase that is somewhat generic. It just refers to people who are descendants of Israel. And that includes, and this is very important, it includes those who don't know that. The vast majority of people who are descendants of Israel do not know that they are descendants of Israel. And that shouldn't come as a surprise because it's a pattern. You probably haven't thought about it, but it's a pattern that's visible in so many other things. If you want to look at people with Irish ancestry, for example, the pattern is there are more Irish outside of Ireland than inside of Ireland. And there are more people with Irish ancestry than those who know that they have Irish ancestry. Now, this pattern is somewhat modified since the widespread development of and deployment of DNA testing. But that isn't very good. So, and not everyone has done that, and it's still pretty recent. But the point is, it's true of Irish people. It's true of Jewish people. It's true of Israelites in general. It's true of Native Americans. So that pattern is true, all those properties, that there are more outside than in, more unknown than known. Okay? And that's actually really important for the end times, although it's not super important for this presentation. So, it's correct to use this phrase to describe all of dispersed Israel. You'll see a reference for that in 3 Nephi 5:24. It's also correct to use this phrase to specifically refer to those members of dispersed Israel in the United States, like is used in 3 Nephi 21:2. But that's just a subset of the phrase. It doesn't refer to them only. It's anyone who's descended from Israel. The remnant means still here, right? People alive today who have descended from Israel. So there's a general pattern prophesied of many times through the scriptures of, in the end times, this people coming in to Gentile, I'll say nations, but it's probably better just say areas. Because you could apply this to actual countries, continents, states, cities, towns. And the pattern is that they'll come in and that what the Gentiles had before in terms of prosperity and socioeconomic superiority will be stripped away. The details of when, of how, it all varies. But here's an example, Mormon 5:24. It says, "Therefore repent ye, and humble yourselves before him is the Lord, lest he shall come out in justice against you, lest a remnant of the seed of Jacob shall go forth among you as a lion, and tear you in pieces, and there is none to deliver. Now again, I don't want to spend an hour talking about the remnant of Jacob. This is information that's already out there. You can find it, and you can probably figure it out more easily than the other things I'm going to tell you today. But one point I want to make explicitly, this is not just righteous people. In fact, numerically, they are the minority. Most of the people that can be described with this phrase are not going to be righteous people. And just getting a little bit more into this, the fulfillment of these prophecies are dual in nature, the remnant of Jacob prophecies, because in the one side of fulfillment is what the righteous people do. And then in the other side, it's what the wicked among them do. And you can interpret these things like a lion going forth and tearing them in pieces, and there is none to deliver. What would that look like for a righteous person? Well, they would obliterate all of your excuses for being wicked. Maybe they have gifts from heaven and demonstrable power from heaven, but they at least will have the ability to persuade you and leave you without excuse. Even if you don't listen to them and don't obey what they're teaching you, they will leave you without excuse. On the other side, with the wicked, what does this look like? Well, they're robbing you, they're murdering you, they're raping you, they're burning things down, they're, so on and so forth. They're filling the welfare rolls, they're taking your job. Okay? Righteous people will also take your job, but there's a Venn diagram here. But again, I just want to sort of blurt that out and move on so you can take that and run with it. So now I want to highlight some examples of this that are already underway, and you may be more or less aware of this. So the first I want to talk about is visas. So immigration visas, not the credit card. There are a multitude of visas available to enter the U.S., and I'm not going to go into detail about all those. I don't have the details on all of them. I am unusually familiar with a couple of them for various reasons from my family and professional life. So let's talk about this one called the H-1B. It's a visa for skilled individuals to come to the U.S. and take jobs that companies say they cannot fill with American citizens. And the reason is that they're not available in sufficient numbers. So for H-1B, you put together an application on behalf of a person that would take the job, and then you send it off, and there's a lottery, and there's a set number of slots that they fill, and then they verify your defense of why it's needed, and then the person gets to come here and work for a certain amount of time. And then from there are avenues to convert that. There's a pathway to citizenship from there. So some people know that, some people don't know that. But what far fewer people know is that this is wildly abused by companies in the United States, and the worst offenders are the tech companies. So what happens is, for a long time, for years and years, tech workers were in short supply. And so the salaries started to get astronomical. And what do I mean by that? So just a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, if you got a bachelor's degree in computer science, you could get hired at $88,000 or $92,000 a year with full benefits and really cushy time off and everything else, in spite of the fact that it would take you 6 months to a year of on-the-job work before, in many cases, before you could add any value whatsoever to that company. In many cases, those people would change jobs before they ever got to the point where they were adding value more than their cost to the company. And you say, well, why were companies even hiring them? Because investors wanted to see increases in the number of employees. So not to get too off the rails here, but in the free money environment of no interest rate money printing from the federal government, the venture capital people had a lot of money, and they were playing this game of hot potato where they'd invest in a company just starting out with the intent not that the company would make some product later and become profitable, but that they would hit metrics that were not, well, I don't want to say made up, but metrics indicating some kind of growth as a company that wasn't necessarily connected at all to an actual product or customers. And then they'd flip the hot potato, it's like flipping a house, to other investors. And they'd get their shares bought out, and then they'd rinse and repeat. And this just kept going. You had companies who'd been through these rounds many, many times. And it was working very well for a lot of people to get rich, right? But the problem was the developers' salaries got so inflated so quickly that, like I said, the entry-level people were just making crazy amounts of money while not really adding much value at all. So as interest rates started increasing, these tech companies started losing a lot of money because now they couldn't just borrow the money or get more VC rounds because the VCs stopped investing so much because they didn't have as much access to it. It became more expensive for them to access it. And these entry-level people were quickly identified as surplus because they were costing the companies a fortune. So against this backdrop, and this isn't the unique cause of this, but it's a principal component to help understand the problem. Ever since the 90s, when this law was first passed, the H-1B law, companies have used this as a mechanism to artificially suppress wages in their companies. And it's kind of complicated how they do that, but the long and short of it is these H-1B workers are essentially indentured servants. Their only way to stay here is to keep that visa. And so they'll agree to very bad working conditions and terrible salary because it's still way more than they would get in their home country, which is typically a place like India. And with that culture that they're coming from and also the pressure they're under, they'll work maybe twice as many hours a week as American citizens will, and maybe for as little as half the pay. And what it does is it creates a culture where all the other workers are pushed to work a lot more hours, and also where the employer can push down the wages of everyone else, saying that, well, this is just what we pay. And it wouldn't work if those H-1Bs weren't there. So that's my brief summary of that issue. Now, to make matters a lot more shady, several very large quote-unquote consulting companies have made a complete scam of this by hiring, I'm trying to think, I think Cognizant is one of them. I think they have 85,000 H-1Bs, hiring massive quantities of H-1Bs and then skirting because the U.S. has these regulations that they use equations to limit the discount that you can have on an H-1B employee versus it has to be in line with what you're paying the other employees. So to get around that, they would hire the H-1B through the consulting company. And now they don't have to prove that that person's getting paid as much as the normal developers, for example, because they say, no, but these guys are consultants. They're not normal developers, right? So they skirt that, and then they started laying off massive amounts of developers because it's so much cheaper to go with the H-1Bs via the consulting firms. And then the consulting firms would skim a bunch of the money they were billing to the tech companies and so on. So it was a big, big scam. Now, how big of a scam? Well, and not all these jobs were rerouted through consulting. but this is an amalgam of a bunch of different causes. I mentioned two of them, the drying up of the cheap money and then these consultants, but there are other factors. So in 2022, 100,000 employees were laid off. Now again, these are six-figure salaries, okay? In a lot of these companies, in these time frames, a mid-level career person was making 150 or more a year. And it's not uncommon for senior level to be making over 200. And it depends a lot on where these jobs are and everything else, but it's not hard to find that. So 2022, there were 100,000 laid off. In 2023, it was 200,000. And this year it's been 150,000 in 2024. Now, many of these jobs were rehired with H-1Bs. And there are multiple news articles. You can search all these companies, Disney, Apple, a bunch of big companies have been busted doing this, and then they settle out of court with a class action suit. And there are news articles in the mainstream about that you could look up. It's been a huge scam. So, what is the economic impact of getting laid off if you're making $200,000 a year? That's huge. It's not like you can just go work at Buc-ee's as a manager and make up for that, right? It's a very, very different life. You've tuned to that for years and years and years, and you're working hard. You're still working 50, 60, 70 hours a week on these higher paid development jobs. But you can't keep up with this H-1B who works at least that much, probably longer hours, and they make half as much as you do. Okay, so then there are all these other visa programs too. It's not just H-1B. And H-1B, like I said, there are rules about the minimums that you have to pay these people. Nationally, I think it's $65K. You can't go lower than that. It's something like that. But then they use economic data for the job description in the region, and you have to be within a certain threshold. And like I said, there are ways of skirting that. But there are all sorts of other visa programs, including for lower paid employees, where there's no salary floor or hourly pay floor, and a lot of these are non-technical jobs. H-1B also has a cap on the number. There are visa programs that don't. So the point is that these programs are absolutely already siphoning off major numbers of jobs from American citizens. Now, I don't want to get in the economics of this, obviously. If they didn't have immigrants to fill these jobs, either the jobs would go vacant or they'd have to offer more money for the pay, or someone would just have to work more, But the details, it's not as simple as if there weren't immigrants, then these jobs would go to currently unemployed people. That's way too much of an oversimplification, but it is having an enormous economic effect already. Then you've got the illegals. Now, this is not a new thing. Illegal immigration has been a problem for many decades. However, even in more recent history, things like letting people cross the border and not going after them, or passing policies to prevent government officials from prosecuting these people, that's been going on for a while. Obama had all sorts of things going on where many, many illegal immigrants were prevented from being prosecuted, and they were left here, and it's not exactly amnesty, but it's a soft kind of amnesty. Like, well, you broke the law, but we're not going to do anything about it, promise. So the official number of illegal entries under Biden is at least 7.2. I've seen estimates in the two digits. What was it? 51 was the highest I saw, I believe, 51 million. The truth is nobody knows, and the people that are supposed to know are absolutely not going to count. Okay? So it's a lot. Even if this floor is the full amount, it's a lot. 7.2 million, if you put that in perspective, the population of Montana is about 2 million. So that's a lot of people, okay, in 4 years. Now, immigration is a global problem. I've brought this up for years here and there, but when Europe started to have some serious issues, I talked about that quite a bit, and we've seen how that has gone. If you haven't looked into that, it's quite a story. The news articles coming out of places like Ireland are really something, or the UK. It's a mess. To put it bluntly, it's a mess. So all these first world nations, the details differ, but the pattern's the same. And that's important. Okay, we'll come back to that. All of this is already happening. In Europe, things are a little more advanced than here. I guess I should say retrograde. It's worse. But they let more people in sooner, and they have way less to sort of sponge up the problems than we do. And so it's a real problem over there. And it's just getting to be a really big problem here. And you've seen these news reports, which I told you this stuff was going to happen before it happened. But you've seen the news reports of gangs coming. It's basically all the problems that are in the third world come with the people that you import from the third world. So you've got gangs operating. They're taking over apartment complexes. People are being murdered. There's a lady that got immolated on the train in New York. Just crazy stuff that if it happened here before, it was a lot more rare. And now all of a sudden it's an enormous problem. What's not in the news is how much the welfare rolls have exploded. You might see some reports about ER wait times. Why do you think it's so hard to get into the ER these days? It's because there are tons of illegals who are going to the ER. Why do you think it takes so long to get on Medicaid or food stamps these days? It's because there are tons of immigrants who are getting on those programs, right? What's the statistic? I think immigrants from Mexico, 45% of them end up on welfare. I don't remember off the top of my head. It's high, okay? So, and we with the crossings during Biden's administration, it's become a much more global set of people. It's not just folks from geographically close countries coming in. Massive numbers of Chinese have come in, massive numbers of people from different countries in Africa, and not just the folks that could walk, right? So what are some future possibilities? And just so you know, we're about to hit some scriptures, and that's actually, I think, the most important part of this presentation, but you could be the judge of that. So it's no surprise that the same sorts of things could keep happening. Maybe that is a surprise because maybe you think that the incoming administration is going to be drastically different than the outgoing one. It could be the case, and there could be new ways that they bring a lot more people in, or it's an or, they could do a lot of the same things, because the last time Trump was president, there were a lot of the same things that he did, right? And it was kind of surprising to some people. So things like more visas. So Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are in charge of this pseudo-government organization, this think tank, if you will, and they're supposed to be cutting waste. Well, both of them are enormous proponents of H-1B. They say we need even more, way more, no cap, take off the cap, make it easier for them to come. Let them become citizens just because they have a bachelor's degree, that they get a bachelor's degree in the U.S., make them citizens, right? And so what's this going to do? Well, let me finish the list first. So we could have even more illegal immigration, and that might make your head explode. It could totally happen. There's no guarantee that President Trump will put that under wraps. But even if he doesn't, it could just continue at rates that are slightly less than what they were under Biden. It's not going to go to zero, that's for sure, okay? Then there is the possibility of amnesty. And maybe that's the last thing on your mind, but remember, Trump likes to win, right? He likes fighting a fight, and then after he feels like he's won, he'll backtrack big time. He's done that on many things. It's a pattern. But who knows? From where or when? Who knows? Let's look out more than 4 years. Maybe the next president does it. But it's something that has happened multiple times in the past. And so it stands to reason it might happen again. And again, I think we all have a tendency to think about these things closer to home, but these are global patterns. It's happening all around the world in all the first world nations. The details differ, the patterns are the same. Now, this is probably an appropriate place to mention that Europe and the UK and the United States and Canada are not the first places to go through all this. By the way, I mentioned how Europe is advanced in years over us with these problems. Canada is absolutely ahead of us on that. So you can look into that if you want to see a preview of what's coming. But what's likely coming. But if you look across the globe, Rhodesia and South Africa went through this decades ago. And if you want to see what ends up happening to a first world nation that gets overrun by third world people, look at what is now Zimbabwe and look at modern South Africa. Let's just focus on South Africa. It was a first world self-sufficient paradise for the people that lived there, okay? They made their own fighter jets and they had their own assault rifles and they had everything that we have here as far as power plants. They had massive surpluses of food, almost no crime. It was a paradise, okay? But in the 90s, they opened up the vote to everyone. And when they did that, of course, immediately, the people that got elected were very corrupt, and everything just went downhill very quickly. And if you look at it today, they have rolling blackouts, they have constant food shortages, everything costs a fortune, there's no prosperity. If you're white, you can't get a job, you can't run a company, there's reverse affirmative action, it's rampant. And everyone who can is fleeing the country. And it's been that way for a good decade or more. So how do you think American prosperity would change if there were rolling blackouts in this country? Just that, like nothing else. By the way, if you go to South Africa and you ask everyone you meet, if you ask them, do you personally know someone who has been murdered? They will say yes. It is one of the highest violent crime places in the world. And they do not enforce crime. Does that sound familiar? That's where we're going in this country. They don't enforce crime unless you're white. It causes huge problems, okay? So, now I want to shift gears, and the next thing's the scriptures. Before we get there, though, I want to give you a key. It's a key about end times prophecy. You've probably never heard what I'm about to tell you, but you can take this and run with it. You'll learn so much if you do this. So we know that God operates by laws of cause and effect, right? He established those laws before the creation of the world. When you see prophecies, it's true that they will have specific fulfillment. But every single one of them is based on and therefore demonstrates general principles. And those principles are not tied to specific times, places, people. It's the situation. It's a principle. If you have the same conditions, you'll experience the same outcomes. And this is why, for example, there's a set of circumstances throughout history, and you'll see this throughout the scriptures, that generate pestilence, famine, civil war, and foreign invasion, for instance. And so you can predict with perfect accuracy that those things will occur if the conditions are met. Why? Because God is no respecter of persons. That's the consequence. If you fulfill the conditions, you will get the consequence. So the effect of this is that it doesn't exactly erase a bunch of things that people spend their times worrying about with prophecy, scriptural prophecy, but it certainly reduces the importance of precision. What am I talking about? Well, there are endless debates. What country is this talking about? In Isaiah, is Egypt the United States? People will say, where is the United States in the book of Isaiah? Who cares is a good answer. Because any nation that fulfills the conditions of the promised destruction in Isaiah will be destroyed exactly how it's described in Isaiah. Do you get it? What does this do for the question of, has this prophecy been fulfilled? Again, it matters, but it also doesn't matter. It matters a lot less than you thought. Maybe that's the best way of saying it. Because if the conditions happen again, so will the outcome. Now, there's some nuance in this, but that's basically it. So look for the patterns. Don't waste so much time with the particulars. So with that in mind, I'm going to show you how to do this with some obscure verses that you probably never read, but if you did, you probably didn't take note of them. Here are some patterns of what to expect in this whole immigration debacle. Gentile nations and immigration. First world areas, and like I said before, don't just get locked into countries. That's true. Countries have borders. But this is true. States, cities, and towns, and you can jump between those resolutions and see different things and expect different things. These areas will be affected enough so as to be substantively changed. There will be a fundamental difference because of immigration. A scripture about this is Jeremiah 12:9. It says, "Mine heritage is unto me as a speckled bird. The birds round about are against her. Come ye, assemble all the beasts of the field, come to devour." Now the beasts and the birds are not synonyms here. There are subtle differences, and I'm not going to take the time to just infinitely parse this. You can do that on your own or find somebody who's into that. But these are foreign nations, foreign people, okay? And those are figures that are used in other places too, like in Isaiah, and you could read more about that. But they're not here for nice things. They're here to devour. And what is mine heritage? It's a place or people that have been previously blessed by the Lord. All first world nations have. All first world nations have prosperity far beyond what they deserve. And that should get people's attention. It doesn't, but it should. The next pattern. The people who come will be worse than those they join. And it will break systems and customs that rely on better culture. Now, I'll just pause here. The way the world uses the word culture, it's not very accurate. It's limited in a lot of ways because most of the time they really mean race. And that's unfortunate because culture does not mean race. There's no such thing as misappropriating culture. Culture is a set of beliefs and or behaviors. Behaviors are sort of predicated upon beliefs. But what you should think about this as, pretty much every kid in elementary school had a little pencil box. Think of some of those pencils are really worn out. Some are brand new. Some don't have erasers. Think of a bundle of pencils with a rubber band around it. The only thing holding those things together is the association you put them into. That's a set of beliefs. That's a culture. Now you can put a name on that, right? So growing up in and around Baltimore, there's definitely a Baltimore City culture, and it's not good, okay? But you'll see that elements of that same culture in other places. I've seen it on Indian reservations. I grew up in a culture, in a poor family. There were definitely ideas and behaviors that were common among a whole bunch of different poor people, right? So you can pick and choose with a culture, but that's probably enough about that. The point is that our nation relies on a culture that its people no longer have, And so we're kind of riding on fumes anyway. The tank's empty. We're just coasting on momentum at this point. Those of you who are old or blessed enough to drive a manual transmission, we're popping the clutch and we've just come off a hill and we're just coasting on a flat, okay? The car's slowly slowing down, but every time there's a little bump, it slows down a lot faster. And here come the immigrants, right? And the immigrants, I will discontinue this analogy because I might say something that I don't intend to be inflammatory, but the immigrants are sudden slowdowns. There's no juice. There's no engine power to overcome those barriers. Every single one will bring the vehicle to a much slower state. Anyway, what's the scripture for this? Well, one is Ezekiel 7:24. Wherefore I will bring the worst of the heathen. This is pretty dang explicit. And they shall possess their houses. I will also make the pomp of the strong to cease, and their holy places shall be defiled. Now, I'll get into the pomp and the holy places, but there are so many prophecies about houses in the Old Testament. And you can dissect the patterns with the key that I've given you. You know, what is Isaiah talking about when he says that people will keep building until all the houses are adjoined and there's no space left? And what's he talking about when he talks about the vacant houses? Something will happen and there will be many, many nice houses that are vacant. Well, what happens when no one, I'm not saying this is the thing, but it's a thing. Well, if no one can afford to buy them, guess what? And you say, well, they just bring down the price. There are a multitude of things that could happen to prevent that outcome. Did you know that banks hold a ton of houses right now, and they've been doing this for years and years and years, ever since the fallout of the housing crisis in 2008? A lot of banks will hold a lot of vacant properties to prevent having to write off a loss on their books because they can lend money against the value, the book value of that house. But if they sell it, it's probably going to be a short sale or a foreclosure. They're going to have to lower the price. Plus, it'll flood the market and crash the housing market. So they just hold the house because it's worth more to them vacant than it is sold. Do you get it? They do it all the time. I have firsthand experience with this. With this trailer years ago, it's a long story, but we were looking to buy this house trailer, and we had this wrangle with the bank because they just didn't want to sell it. It was vacant. It was foreclosed. They just didn't want to sell it. They'd rather hold it. Well, that's an outcome. That's something that's already happening that could cause vacant houses. If people just foreclose, the bank comes, puts padlock, kicks you out. Why? There's so many problems with squatters now. Why are the houses vacant in the first place, right? Okay, so it's the worst of the heathen. They'll possess their houses again. Squatters. Is that the only fulfillment of this? I'm not saying that. But the easiest thing to do is to look at what's already happening. It's shooting fish in a barrel. You make prophecies that are already fulfilled, right? So then let's get to this. I will, by the way, many different types of immigrants, they'll shack up like 20 people in a house. And so that McMansion might be out of your price range because you can't get a mortgage for $1 million. Well, maybe 20 illegals can. I will also make the pomp of the strong to cease, or maybe they'll rent it for some obscene price because to them it's not obscene. They're splitting it 20 ways. I will also make the pomp of the strong to cease. What is the pomp? Here's a theme that you're going to see all over the scriptures, especially the Old Testament. The crowns of the opulent, the wine of Babylon, the wreaths, the things that they are proud of and they think have value and they think make them valuable. It's the false attainments of wickedness, really. It's a Babylon economy, the riches of Babylon, the honors of Babylon, the pomp of the strong. They're not really strong, but people think they're strong. They think themselves to be strong, and they look at people and say, that's a strong person. Kim Kardashian is a leader. No. And it will cease. Well, how could immigrants cause that to change? There are a lot of ways, but it fundamentally shifts the fabric of our systems of value. I don't mean our moral systems of value only, but I mean our value systems of value, how we assess and appraise value. What's worth it? What do people want and why? And again, same approach with this holy places. Does that mean that churches will be defiled? Well, quite literally, yes. They get burned down. They get spray painted. They get harassed, and people are afraid to go because it's not safe, because people get shot or robbed. But also figuratively, what's a holy place? What are your idols? What if your idols got defiled? What if you couldn't so freely go to your sports ball events because for whatever reason, either the games became too expensive or they weren't safe? I just saw a news article today where they have SWAT teams, sniper teams in stadiums now, just in case something goes down. Or defiled could also mean in a case like that, it could mean that you just don't want to be there anymore. Have you ever gone to a movie theater in the inner city? I have, and I'll never do it again. I've done it several times. I'll never do it again. Why? Because you can't get out of that what you would go there for, because the people there ruin it. All right. Then the final pattern I wanted to share, this is not at all exhaustive. There are so many scriptures laying out these patterns. This one's from the curses that Moses warns the people about if they reject the covenant. So here's the principle. Those already there will fall in socioeconomic position as those who come ascend. The scriptures, Deuteronomy 28:43. The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. Again, this is very explicit. It's detailed. It's clear. Now, how could that happen? Again, there is a multitude of possibilities. But I've already given you the ingredients to a whole bunch of them with these visas. And again, it's already happening. When you make $200,000 a year and you've spent 4 years going through a very hard degree program, and then years and years getting to that level, and you're 15 or 17 years into your career, and then your boss comes and says, we have this guy from India, and he's taking your job, and you're going to train him. You've got 2 weeks, and then we're firing you. And this happens by the 100,000s. Guess what? The stranger that is within thee just got up above you. And you are now unemployed. You see that? And here's the thing that I want to warn you about. And I have something on, there are 2 more slides left. There's another note about this. This is going to come on you like a thief in the night. That's why I'm warning you about it. And is it going to be everyone? No. It's hardly ever the case that that's the way these things happen, that they happen here and there. There are patterns, but maybe you get out without getting it. It's like lung cancer if you smoke. Maybe it's not going to get you. It's just 25% of people that smoke get lung cancer, whatever it is. But you need to know about it because it's coming. It's going to affect a lot of people. And it's not just the tech bros. It's not just the tech bros. There's so many patterns that were forged in the tech world that are crawling out into the mainstream economy. Did you know? So there's a pattern where private equity will buy a company and then merge it with another company or another 4 companies and then resell it to someone else. It's that hot potato thing I was telling you about. But this is one of the patterns. Usually they would just do this with tech companies. That's where they forged it. and perfected it. Did you know that they're doing that like crazy with trade companies now, service companies like roofers? These firms are going to, your Uncle Ted, who's been a roofer, he's got his little roofing company for 30 years. They're saying, hey, Ted, you've been doing this for a while. How about we buy you out for $4 million? And Ted was not expecting to sell his company. That's not the pattern that these companies do. You just kind of retire one day, or you fall off a roof and die, or you pass it down to your kid, and that's it. And it's just, yeah, I'll take that payday. I can't get up on a ladder anymore because my knees are shot. And I'm sick of dealing with people I have to hire that don't speak English. Okay, well, here's your $4 million. And then they join a couple of these companies together and get a CEO, kind of cutthroat CEO type to run it. And they mark up their prices by 200%. And now they've got a monopoly because they bought up the 4 roofing companies in the area. This is happening everywhere, okay? It's one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, that the trades, the cost of hiring tradespeople is going up. There are a lot of reasons, but that's one of them. So in the same fashion, maybe you're not in tech. And so all this H-1B is Greek to you. Well, guess what? Maybe, I got a friend that's a banker. Maybe the H-1B is coming for you next. So especially if they make it easier, especially if they raise the cap, but just because the value of the dollar keeps falling because of inflation, the relative value of the dollar, it just keeps falling. And so these folks are going to do what they can to keep squeezing out profits even as prosperity evaporates out from under us. So where does that leave the employees? Where does that leave the small business guys and gals? They're going to get crushed. All of them? Not necessarily, but more of them. More of them will. So that's pretty dark, but what's the light? What's the positive side of this? I think this is probably going to be bittersweet, but it's true, and it's the best we've got. So much of the good that you have in your life is not deserved. And I hope you don't get mad at me for saying that. But just fundamentally, like we've picked on Indians who come here with H-1Bs, let's prop them up a little here and recognize, like I said, a lot of these guys are willing to work 100 hours a week. They're willing to live at work. Do you know anybody who's willing to do that? Do you know anybody who's willing to do that for $70,000 a year or $80,000 a year? Not have a life outside of work? Probably not, right? Well, why do you deserve it more than they do? Because I'm an American. Okay, but what did you do to earn that? Maybe your great-great-grandfather did something to earn that, but what did you do to earn that? And therein lies the problem, right? So as God starts pulling away these things that were given as a gift, and by the way, this is the pattern of the entire gospel. You get as a gift something you don't deserve that someone else paid for. And then he says, are you willing to live the law required to keep it? And as a nation, as an entire first world set of nations, the answer is a resounding no. We are not willing to do what it takes to keep what you have given us that we don't deserve. So he's going to take it away. And I told you that this was the good news, and it probably doesn't sound that way. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you've got an Audi A4 or a boat or a McMansion or central heat. We're not here to get those things, although I wouldn't know for some of those things, but flushing toilets, I can testify to the value of that, okay? Or mattresses. What we're here to do is to obtain more of God's word and live it. To voluntarily do that. To learn as much as we can about God and live up to everything we know. That's the purpose. Because that's what produces joy. Eternal joy. And guess what we need in order to be more willing to do that? Well, all these bad things. So maybe something that's a little easier to see as a good part of this is that it won't all be bad people who come. Some good people are going to come because they want to work hard and they want to have opportunity. They want to have families that they can afford. I was talking to a gentleman at Home Depot in Provo 12 years ago now, I guess. And I was practicing my Spanish, and I said, "Where are you from?" He's from Mexico. I said, "How are things down there?" He said, "Terrible." I said, "Can't you get a job down there?" Because he was telling me he used to work construction, and he was just sort of, moving wood to people's trucks in the pickup area. I said, "Can't you get a construction job down there?" He said, "There isn't really work, but even if you do get work, your wages for one day are enough to buy one chicken." He said, "I have 2 kids. It's not enough money, so I'm here." I said, "Well, I can't argue with that." So people like that are doing the best they can to support a family. What about people who come here because of the gospel? And you might be thinking to yourself, "Well, I don't know anybody like that yet." You don't yet. There will be people who move obstacles to get over here, and they'll do it through work, because unless you're marrying somebody, the easiest way to get into the United States legally is to marry somebody. The second easiest way is through a work visa. So I guess you could come over here as a student as well, but that's an option too. That costs a lot of money. But when you get a job, they pay for that, right? So that's good. What about safety? And again, maybe you don't know anyone like that yet. But as people catch on to the disintegration of other areas, there are a whole lot of people in South Africa who wish they could move to the United States. I'll tell you that. Maybe we'll have 1 or 2 viewers attest to that in the comments, so you know I'm not making it up. And then some of the people who come over here with less than perfect reasons will repent. God will use this movement of people to spread the gospel. Now, it won't be everyone, it won't even be most of them, but some of them will. And what you're going to find is that those people will be among the set of people that I previously described to you as those who take much more seriously the things that are being revealed today and that have been revealed in prior times. They'll take it much more seriously. And what takes you 10 years to change, they'll change in a day or a week. And that will significantly change the pace of things. Last slide. How can you prepare for all of this? So again, it's already ongoing. And so I don't forget, I'll start with this reminder off to the side. And I already mentioned this in terms of immigration visa jobs coming for your job. So the risk of your job being replaced by an immigrant is a lot higher than you think. Probably a lot higher than you think. But on a related note, and that this is kind of parallel to this talk, it's not directly related, but it's the same sort of problem. And I just want to take advantage to give another warning about this. I've made videos about this. AI is going to disrupt a lot more jobs than what people realize. And I'm telling you, it is here. And it's going to get worse. And don't fall for these, I'll call it misguided, ideas that it's going to usher in some period of unprecedented prosperity. It's not. The pattern is absolutely clear. And it's nothing new. It's just no one's really smart enough to see it. And so I haven't seen anybody talk about it. But it's well established. It's going to follow the pattern of splitting current markets, current job markets, between people who are way more intelligent than average in that market, who are able to use AI to be even more productive than they were before, and the people that build those tools and maintain those tools. And then the other side of the split, which is much bigger, will be all of the normal kind of people who are in that field who lose their jobs. And there is nothing equivalent for them to go to and do. You're going to see this running rampant. So that's the reminder that I wanted to hit you with. And you'll see that this is another bullet of support for these things that I'm going to mention right now. How can you prepare? First and foremost, repent of your sins. Now, if you're familiar with the things that I teach, this means a lot more to you than someone else, because you can fill in a lot more details about what that means and apply it. But the clock is ticking. Get on it. On a related note, align yourself with God, and that's repenting of your sins, but also start to align your family with God. Now, I've written a whole book called Joy on Purpose that gives you all kinds of tools to get started on that. But the central one is to make a life plan and start to live it. And that book, Joy on Purpose, will tell you how to do it. You can get it for free at upwardthought.org/books. You can download a PDF for free there. You don't even have to sign up. You can order a paper copy from Amazon if you'd like, and those are there at cost. At Amazon's cost. I don't get money from that. So here's the scripture to motivate you in that task. This is D&C 88:119. It says, organize yourselves, prepare every needful thing, and establish a house, even a house of prayer, a house of fasting, a house of faith, a house of learning, a house of glory, a house of order, a house of God. And so that's what you should do. Specifically, I want to call attention to the need to make your ideas of cost and benefit more explicit. Now, hopefully that makes sense what I mean by that, but briefly, very, very, very briefly, a lot of people are living in ways where their decisions about how to acquire and expend resources are just shooting from the hip. They take it as it comes, right? That is not enough, and it's not going to be enough as the future rolls on. You really do have to list out what's important to you, and the book gives you all kinds of guidance on how to do this. It doesn't tell you what to do, but it shows you how to do it. List out what matters and why, and order your efforts by priority. It's very important. Why is it important? Because you're going to need to establish a surplus. You're going to need extra time. You're going to need extra money. You're going to have room to breathe so that you can find and take advantage of opportunities. So many people live check to check, and I don't mean that in the strictly financial sense. They only think about what they need right now or what they want right now. You have to extend that time horizon into the future, at least by a year or two, but probably a decade. And the reason for that is, without doing that, it's never what you need to do that is what's best is never going to make sense, because you're going to be accounting for it in terms that are too short, in lengths of time that are too short. As a simple example of this, it used to be a really good idea for almost everybody to go to college. It's not the case anymore. But even back then, if you were making that decision based on the cost and benefit of today, it wouldn't make any sense. Why would you do that, right? Just paying you're getting hit with the tuition bill for a semester, it's not going to make any sense that day. You have to look out and say, well, what job am I going to get? And what's my likely salary? And what's my likely progression? And what's my life going to be like at that time? Is this worth it? Or should I just give this all up and get a job at Wendy's or whatever, right? Whatever alternative you might have. And some of those alternatives today are definitely a lot better. We talked about trades. I've talked about that a lot anyway. But you've got to have room to breathe. So, probably, not necessarily, but it's highly likely that as you start thinking about these things and how you could best situate yourself, you probably are going to want to move. And there are multiple reasons for that. One, you don't want to be living on the border with Mexico as the flood of immigrants continues to come in. You probably don't want to live in California for a whole host of reasons. And you might have good reasons that overwhelm all of those bad reasons. But you probably want to get to a more rural area. And I've talked about that at length in other videos. I won't rehash that. A big one is making yourself more robust to economic change. What happens if you lose your job? There are a lot of people out there who, if they lost their job, they would be toast in a matter of days. Definitely within a month. Why? Well, maybe they are paying off a house and it's totally jacked up. And if they put it on the market, it would take them 6 months to get it ready to sell. Maybe they don't have any savings and they have a high mortgage. Maybe they have a work from home job and maybe the market for that job is kind of thin. And so there's a high likelihood that if they lost their job, they'd have to up and move because they wouldn't be able to get anything local that could pay what they earn working remote, and they can't get another remote job. And it goes on and on and on. Maybe they have a first mortgage and a second mortgage, and they've loaded up their credit cards, and they're making $400,000. This is not hypothetical. I know someone in this boat. They're making $400,000 a year, but they live check to check. And none of their money, none of their assets are liquid. It's 2 houses, right? One's a rental and the other is lived in. Well, if that guy loses his ability to earn an income, he is in big trouble. He's going to lose everything. And we could go on, but the point is, you make yourself robust against economic changes. It's like if you had a fort, you start shoring up the weakest parts. There's a segment of the Book of Mormon that talks about that. You think about what could change and what would hurt you the most, and then you apply likelihoods to it, and you rank order that and start doing things about it. So what are some ideas? Well, it's a good idea to have some savings. So if you spend all the money coming in every month, maybe you can look over the list of how you spend that and line item some things that maybe don't provide the value, as much value as savings would. Maybe you establish some investments, and obviously that's its own topic to look into. Maybe you look at establishing multiple income streams. And maybe that's something big, like you want to start a company. Typically, that's usually not a good idea, but maybe it is in your case. Maybe it's something a lot smaller. Maybe it's even something where it's like mostly a business that your kids run for you or for themselves. And if you had to, you could maybe scale it up, but at a minimum, it's bringing something in each month. And then there's this idea of cash flow. Maybe if you have the ability to, maybe you could buy some house or something that you could rent out. Or maybe if you have kids, and depending on what their ages are, maybe it makes sense to start looking at either, you could clear out one of your rooms in your house if you have a room that maybe it's just storing junk or something. It's your I don't know, computer game room or something. And maybe you could set that up to have your kid move into there and rent it out from you when they become an adult. Or maybe they're renting someplace that's not in your house and they're paying a lot of money per month in rent. Maybe you can get them on a lease to rent a room in your house if that works for both of you. And they can save money and then you can earn money. And the benefit there is that hopefully your kids aren't going to rip out your copper pipes and sell it for meth, right? But a property rental might. You can look at growing more of your own food. That's a good idea, and also maybe a reason to move. And then you can start to organize yourself with other families. And what do I mean by that? Well, you could take this as far as you want to, and I highly advise you don't do that. But I'm talking about just small things. Like, let's say you have a really good friend or a sibling maybe who's a similar stage in life as you, or not too far away from that. And you can start working together more on different things. Like maybe this multiple income stream that you're developing, maybe that's something that you could use some help on, or you each have resources to bring to bear on that. The sky's the limit. The variety here is high. But again, I've referenced this in other videos. The point is, one reliable way to bring opportunities within reach is to think outside the box in terms of working together with others. So for example, and I'm not saying you should do this, I just am using this as an extreme illustration to make it clear. Amish people don't have health insurance. One, they all agree to live much healthier lifestyles than most Americans, so they don't need it that much. But two, and they're not big fans of pharmaceuticals that are overprescribed amongst the rest of the population. But secondly, when something catastrophic happens, like Amos falls down and breaks his leg, falls off the wagon, literally, not, figuratively, because I don't think they drink either. But anyway, I should keep my jokes to a minimum, otherwise you're going to crack up. Huh? So Amos breaks his leg. Don't break a leg, but he does anyway because he's telling bad jokes. He falls off the wagon and he breaks his leg. The community, if Amos's family can't afford to take care of that broken bone, the community will just come together and take care of it. It's all voluntary. Now I don't have the rule book of all Amish, the Amish code book version 6.7.2, revision December 2024, but this is in general, this is how it works. Imagine how much money you could save per year if you didn't need health insurance, which costs on average more than $30,000 per family now, per year. That's a lot of dough. Now, I'm just throwing that out as an example. You could scale this way down. Like, what if you helped each other work on your cars when they needed an oil change? You said, like, look, we could probably figure out how to do this. If we pitch up, we could buy an oil pan and a jack stand and an inexpensive set of ratchets. And we can watch some YouTube videos and we just share them because, we don't need an oil pan all day, every day, and we'll just share it. And now you can save whatever it costs to get an oil change these days. I don't know because I haven't done it. I've done it myself for years and years. But it's probably like $150 that you could save. And it's way more convenient. It's 15 minutes instead of hours because you don't have to sit there and wait, and you're not going to have some knucklehead forget to put the oil cap back on. And if he does, it's you, so it's your own fault, right? But you get the point. So start thinking about this. And it's yet another reason to read Joy on Purpose and think about how you can apply those things to your life. So I hope this has been helpful. Now this is off my chest. I've warned you, these things, and I hope that the Lord blesses you. I pray that he blesses you as you seriously consider the message I've shared with you, the reasons I've given you, and you figure out what parts of this mean something to you, which parts are credible to you, and then which specific actions you can take that will be different as a result.